Hi folks, Chase here again. I'm going to finish off Chapter 2. The second major concept that we wanted to get a handle on was comparative advantage. Comparative advantage was first introduced by David Ricardo. And David Ricardo was an Englishman, and he was concerned about the level of protection that was being afforded English agriculturalists. This was helping them to sell their grain, and it was also helping landlords to collect large rents. However, it was driving up food prices, and it was costing capitalists and industrialists more and more in terms of wages. So Ricardo was concerned that this was slowing down the overall growth in the economy, and he wanted to convince folks that they should be more open to free trade. So the argument that was perhaps the most persuasive and still holds the most currency today is comparative advantage. And Ricardo thought that people were way too fixated on absolute advantage, and absolute advantage is essentially being able to produce more output than a competitor using the same resources. You could probably just think about this even more simply as you're just better at it than the other trading partner. But he said whether or not you were better at something than someone else didn't really matter in terms of whether or not it made sense to trade with that person. He said the thing that you should really be most concerned about is comparative advantage. And comparative advantage was the ability to produce output at a lower opportunity cost than competitors. In other words, when you decided to do something, you didn't miss out as much on output, alternative output, as your competitor might. So if you decide you're going to go out and you are going to make a guitar, you might only miss out on making a third of a motorcycle if that was the other thing you could have done with your time. Whereas your trading partner that you're considering, they might go out there, and if they decide to make a guitar, they could miss out on a whole motorcycle. That would mean that they would have a higher opportunity cost. You'll remember this opportunity cost concept. We covered it briefly with our guns and butter example from the PPF. When we wanted more butter, we missed out on guns. Same sort of thing here. Well, Ricardo effectively argues, and I'll show you numerically here in a second, that you can get a better outcome if people would just follow their comparative advantages. And what he means by follow their comparative advantages is you want to figure out in what you have a comparative advantage, specialize in that, and then go ahead and trade for whatever it is that the other person is going to create for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at a worked example. If we're going to try to follow the law of comparative advantage, as Ricardo suggested, then we're going to need to be able to figure out opportunity costs. So I've got two fictitious countries down here and their production possibilities within a given time period with a certain same amount of resources. Alba can produce 60 units of lead or 30 wool, and Aragonia can produce 30 or 10. What I want you to recognize right off the bat is that Alba has an absolute advantage in both lead or wool. Now, this might lead you to ask, is Alba too good for Aragonia? If Ricardo's right, then no, they're not. They should still specialize and they should trade. But we've got to figure out what it is they're going to specialize in. We've got to calculate opportunity costs first. So when we're talking about opportunity costs, the easiest way to wrangle the math is to start thinking about whatever you want the opportunity cost of needs to go on the bottom of a fraction. So if you want to know the opportunity cost of wool, then we are going to have how much lead are we missing out on per every unit of wool that we create, or we're going to put lead over wool. So in the case of Alba here, if we want to know the opportunity cost of wool, Alba is going to lose out on 2 units of lead per every 1 unit of wool that they decide to create. And the way that I know that that is the answer is because I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in 60 lead which is what they were capable of, and I'm going to put that over 30 wool, which is what they were capable of. So what this is basically telling us is that Alba is going to miss out on 2 lead per wool that they choose to create. Okay, great. So you understand that Alba misses out on 2 lead per every wool that they want to make, but comparative means it has to be compared to someone, right? So we've got to do Aragonia. And when we start looking at Aragonia, we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put their lead over their wool. And we're going to find out that that means that they are going to miss out on 3 lead per wool. Now, it's easy to see now that Alba, in fact, has the lower opportunity cost. 2 is less than 3. When they go out and make a wool, they only miss out on 2 units of lead, whereas when Aragonia does it, Aragonia is actually going to miss out on 3 units of lead. Therefore, Alba is going to specialize in wool. That means, of course, that Aragonia is going to specialize in lead. And this might not seem immediately obvious, but what I want you to recognize is that if we were to figure out the opportunity costs of lead, all we'd do with these fractions is flip them over and look at the reciprocals. And we'd see that, in fact, Alba would miss out on a half a unit of wool per lead, and Aragonia would only miss out on a third of a unit of wool per lead. Hence, they would have the comparative advantage in lead. So we know who's going to do what now. Let's go ahead and start broadening this example out a little bit. Okay, so when we were looking at wool, we understood that Alba was going to lose out on 2 lead per wool, and they were in fact going to specialize in that. Aragonia did not specialize in it because they were going to miss out on 3 lead per wool. Once you've got this worked out, you can always tell what the terms of trade are going to be between 2 countries, or the terms of trade that will make trade acceptable. In order for them to actually be willing to exchange, the relative price of one good to another has got to be between these terms of trade. So Alba, we know, is making wool. So if they were to stop making wool at any given moment, they could go out and they could choose to create 2 lead. So if they're going to trade away wool, they're definitely going to want to get back more than 2 lead. Otherwise, they may as well have just done it themselves. Aragonia, on the other hand, if they're going to go out and they're going to be purchasing wool from Alba, they're never going to want to pay more than 3 lead per wool, because at any given moment, they can stop making 3 units of lead and they can make a unit of wool by themselves. So any terms of trade that actually fall in between these two, 2.1, 2.4, 2.8, anything between 2 and 3 is actually going to be acceptable to both. So let's say that it's 2.6 lead per wool is the price that's actually going in the market. They're going to find this acceptable and they're going to engage in trade. Alba is going to be happy to receive 2.6. Aragonia is going to be absolutely happy to pay less than 3, i.e. 2.6. So this is what's going to guide trade. And another way of thinking about this is that both of these folks are getting a better deal than what they would have got had they been doing it on their own. That's going to be critical for understanding this next slide. Okay, so we understand comparative advantage. We understand how to calculate opportunity costs, so we can figure out what we have the comparative advantage in. And we also understand that by trading, we can do better than if we were to do it by ourselves. So that must mean that we can escape the PPF. I want to show that to you graphically now. And in order to start bridging the two together, I need you to realize that that basic information that I gave you about ALBA can be used to show a ppf. So I'm going to go ahead and make our y variable lead and our x variable wool. This is similar to when we were talking about guns and butter. If you were to have spent all of your time as ALBA and you spent all of it on lead, you could have created 60 units of lead. Or you could have created 30 units of wool. What we're going to see then is you basically have trade-offs. At any given point, you could have stopped making a wool and chose to make 2 lead instead. And this, of course, would move you along the ppf. If you kept making that trade-off, you would eventually get to the point where you were making 60 lead up here at our intercept, and you were, of course, making 0 wool at that point. So how do we escape this with trade? Well, I'm hoping it's pretty obvious at this point that if you can trade at anything between 2 and 3, right? In our example, we were talking about 2.6. Let's go ahead and make this 2.5 for the sake of easier math. If you can trade 2.5 lead per wool, then this is amazing, because you're going to go out there and you're going to start selling wool, and instead of moving over 1 wool and only up 2 lead, which is what your ppf is doing, you're now going to be able to move over 1 wool, but you're going to go up 2.5 lead. That means that instead of going along the line, you actually move over 1, and then you move up further than you would have. That's going to put you at a point outside of your ppf, because every time you trade with your trading partner, you're getting 2.5 rather than just the 2 had you done the trade-off with yourself. This is, of course, how you can jump outside of the ppf, but this is only possible with specialization in trade.